Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some discussion of Path of Exile 2 for once. So there was a whole lot of information about POE 2 that was dropped at ExileCon. That was a convention that GGG held in November of 2019, and I did a bit of a summary of that in a video that I will link down below. However, there was quite a bit of new information that came out as part of today's announcement of the Ultimatum League. And so what I thought I'd do is go through the trailer that was revealed. This is the POE 2 Trailer 2, which basically seems to cover a fair bit of Act 2. There was also a lot more discussion that was done in a much longer video that GGG put out, and I will put a link to that below. But that will give you a bit more of a sense as to some of the other things that are going on. And it's well worth a look if you just want to see some gameplay footage and the like. But without further ado,
Ancient ruins.
Here we go.
Evil grows once more.
So you can see already that this looks a lot better than anything in the current game. And that's to be expected. POE 2 is obviously coming out almost a decade after, probably actually a full decade after the original game. So it'll have a bunch of incremental graphics improvements. That probably means it will have a higher system requirement than Path of Exile 1, although we'll have to find that out. Maybe they'll allow it to run on lower specs. What you're seeing here, although there's not much discussion of it, is Act 2, the core concept of the Act. The idea is that this caravan in the background is your base of operations during it, and you need to progress past certain points. And those locations have locked gates along the way in choke points, and so your character is going to disembark the caravan and then go and clear your way through. It looks really interesting, and obviously the axe is something you do tend to blast through once you've done it a little bit, but it should be really good for an initial playthrough.
The seed of corruption advances, spreading dread and despair. We must give chase.
Now that hooded figure that you saw there on the, this hooded figure, I believe this to be something that's linked to Act 1 in Path of Exile 2, although that's just based on my recollection of what was available of Path of Exile 2 to play at the ExileCon convention. And that was basically a very small amount. He sort of has a bit of a Shaper aesthetic, although he's a different character to the Shaper. This is set 20 years in the future of POE 1, and so I assume that the Shaper is long dead. The Shaper was exiled a few years before the events of Path of Exile 1, and then after that he wound up in the Atlas. Maybe it was longer than no, actually it was more than a few years. It was when Zana was a child. So perhaps 15 years before the events of POE 1, and so that means that the Shaper that we know in the game has been out of Rayclass for 35 years at the time Path of Exile 2 happens. That said, he does look a lot like him with the sort of Dungeons & Dragons Mind Flayer style tentacles and the cloak. So here what you're seeing is this character here fighting using a spear, and the spear, which we'll come to in a sec, is a new weapon class that grants you a couple of inherent skills. There is a skill called Engage, and there is a skill called Disengage. Disengage is particularly cool. It's basically a leap backwards that fires a bunch of additional projectiles. That is a crossbow. You'll see that it's firing up a shot into the air and then it's falling down on the ground. There's two different types of crossbows at least, and each one modifies your basic attack in some specific way. Again, just like the spears, it grants quite a strong identity to fighting with that weapon. That said, given how long it takes for these projectiles to land, I don't see these being particularly good in the current state of the game at all. And here we're just going to see a bunch of bosses. One thing that they talked about in the longer version of the reveal for Path of Exile 2 is that where the bosses, mini bosses, so like we're not talking about the bosses of a zone, we're not talking about bosses that have some particular importance in lore, like say King Kalm, who's a mini boss in Act 4. We're talking about the ones that are just in the way, like Triscarati in Kalm's Dream, like the Dishonored Queen, who I'm trying to think where the Dishonored Queen is. I remember the name. Oh yeah, she's a mini boss in Act 6. She's actually one you have to kill. But they just have pretty straightforward skills. What GGG's goal is with these mini bosses is to make them all memorable in some way. They generally won't have invulnerability phases. They'll generally be fights that you can just outgear and just smash them quickly. But while you don't outgear them, the fights look much more interactive, and you'll see that with a bunch of them being shown here. This is just more playing around with spears. So this is a fight in an arena. This is a fight with a mini-boss, I believe. We're about to get to it. Oh, you know, here's the arena room is first. So this is just this looks like a different type of mini-boss where it's against waves. Really impressive looking effects here. This looks incredible. This statue, I don't know what it's meant to be, except that it looks a lot like the Templar that we're familiar with. So that's the POE 1 Templar. But we'll have to see what it is when we get to it.
3,000 years of dormant malevolence.
And this just gives me such a Cirrus vibe.
We must hunt down the seed and put an end to this madness. If Rayclast is to survive.
So here's a mini boss fight. You'll notice that there are two separate hit point bars up the top. So hit point bars for bosses will be visible the whole time that you're engaging the boss. This is a huge improvement. It's just one of those little changes that a lot of people have requested a lot of times. It's finally getting done in PoE 2. Here there's two bosses, one of which, the Mastodon, is pretty straightforward. The other one, Deathlord of Blackroot Pit, seems vaguely like a Manamu the Liege of the Lightless, which is one of the bosses of the Abyss content, at least to a first glance. You'll see some of their abilities together. I think they're an interesting combination with one straightforward hard-hitting bruiser and one boss that casts spells that you want to actively dodge. So we just sort of flew past a bit too quickly there, but you'll see in this screenshot here that the Deathlord has put a bunch of little obstacles on the ground. Now, I believe that these are basically some sort of little rune that deals damage to you when you stand on them, or something like that. We're going to have to actually play with this fight to be sure, but it does just look like it's a fairly impactful fight. And this Deathlord also has an ability that's quite similar to Baran the Crusader's Slam. If you've ever done that fight, where he slams the ground and then there's a radiation outwards of a whole lot of little particles. Those particles look like they hit really hard. Judging by the video, although GGG do tend to tune things for maximum tension. So when one of their characters almost died, that may have just been for show. We'll have to find out when we actually get to play this. This feels like one of the new map bosses that was added recently, the Perennial King. Again, I believe this to be a mini boss in Act 2. So again, this is a Duresso/Calm type fight. This boss here is an interesting one. What he does is he slams the ground. So he's just a heavy-hitting bruiser with a frontal attack, and then every now and again he'll rear up, slam the ground, and when he does that, chunks of the ceiling fall away, and then they impact down below. Those chunks, when they're falling, do a lot of damage. However, you'll also see that some areas of the ground are lit up. That means that there's no more rocks above to fall from there. So if you fight inside that space, then you'll be safe. And so it's one of those bosses that rewards tactical positioning. It should be a pretty straightforward fight, but it does look like it's a well-made for an easier boss fight. And this Forsaken Sun, we don't really know much about other than it seems a bit like the Omniphobia fight with a hard-hitting frontal attack and a sort of surge forward skill, which is not too dissimilar to Omniphobia's massive frontal cone. So that's basically it in the trailer. Definitely worth watching the longer version of the video, though, that Grinding Your Games put out, and I will put a link to that down in the description of the video. The next thing, though, that's worth a look is just the small amounts of information that were put out on the ultimatum page for Path of Exile. So here we have the information about how spears and siege crossbows work. So the siege crossbow grants the siege cascade skill. This is one of the crossbow-specific skills that you saw, and I believe that's the one that was shown off in the video. So you would have seen that the fires are shot up into the air, and then it lobs down with a freezing aura. What that is the siege crossbow is dealing cold damage with that siege cascade skill. At least that's my understanding of it. We'll get a bit more clarity on that closer to release. The Winged Spear grants 2 skills. There's Engage and Disengage. Engage moves you forward and makes an immediate attack. Disengage jolts you backwards fast and flies out a volley of attacks. So think of it as a combination of dash when you're holding shift so that it dashes you backwards, and also a single spray attack, not too different to, say, split arrow. That's going to be interesting because you can then use the various sockets, the new socket mechanics, to attach to these basic skills. You can attach support gems to them and make it so that, for instance, your disengage is more likely to inflict bleed in conjunction with the chance to bleed support, all sorts of things like that. So there's going to be a lot of ways to play around with these, and I think they'll be a lot of fun. That said, do temper your expectations. As I say here, Path of Exile 2 does not have a release date yet, but we are targeting a closed beta in 2022. So that means that if they don't fall behind on that target, if they don't fail to meet their intended target, then a closed beta is one where you're not going to be able to talk publicly about what you see in the game, and it'll be invite only. At some point, they'll then remove the non-disclosure agreement, and so it may still remain invite only. And then at that point, you'll be allowed to talk about it, you'll be allowed to stream the game, and then at a later point, they'll have an open beta most likely, which means that basically anyone that wants to can sign up for the open beta. The closed beta phases will probably be very unpolished, so expect a lot of bugs, even more than usual for Path of Exile, and expect there to be some massive balance issues. I played in the open beta for Path of Exile 3.0, so that was the Fall of Oriath expansion that brought Acts 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. And at the time that the open beta that I joined the open beta, Acts 5, 6, and 7 were complete. 8, 9, and 10 were not, and so you would complete Act 7 and then immediately jump to maps. And additionally, there were a number of bugs. I think there may have even been a single server wipe after that point. Then after that, they updated it to include Act 8, which was a much less jarring jump, so you'd finish Act 8 and then start mapping. And then they never revealed Acts 9 and 10. They were just a surprise when they went live. We got to find out the ending of the game the same time as everyone that was playing in the live servers did. So given that the closed beta is in 2022, I think we are still looking at 24 months, maybe even as long as 27 months until there's a full PoE 2 retail release. Although, of course, I will keep you updated if anything more firm on that comes out. So, in terms of other things that look like they're going to be interesting, I highly recommend checking out the full gameplay walkthrough 2 video. It's much longer than I want to play on a video. It's a 20-minute video, so I don't want to sort of try and commentate all of that because otherwise we'll be here till Christmas. But I do highly recommend looking at that, and I will put a link to it. And also, if you've got comments and questions, definitely fire away below. The key changes, though, are the skill gem changes. They're still exactly as I discussed in the last video, and a bunch of things related to the core storyline arc. It's going to be 7 acts that are an alternative to Acts 1 to 10, and they will also be an alternative to the first 3 labyrinths. At least that's what we understand at the moment. Anyways, I'm going to leave it there. I hope you have a good one.